Okay, I just chose to do the YouTube one, I guess, because I don't know what I'm doing. Hey y'all, it's Becky here from the Beckisphere, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is Becky, and every Tuesday and Thursday, we talk about the climate here. The problems, yes, but the solutions, yes. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, go ahead and click that subscribe button below, click the like, comment, share, all that good stuff. If you notice it's a different background, I am at my parents' place tonight because, we're going to have dinner afterwards. So they're part of my quarantine bubble. I'm being good, I swear. If you hear a random voice on the side, that is my mom, Sandy. Say hi, Sandy.
Hi, Sandy.
And she is here so that I don't feel like I'm just talking to myself. But I'm not, of course, because I'm talking to y'all. I see a person there. So yes, I'm still not sure if there's one person there, if that counts as me. I still don't know. The jury is still out for me on that one. But and then if you hear a bunch of jingling, that's the doggos. And yeah, we're going through the dinner phase for the dogs, so it's a little disruptive at the moment, but that is okay. I just realized that you are connected to my headphones again, so hold on. Okay, so if that one person does exist and it's not me, please let me know if the audio quality is decent. If not, then yeah, let me know. But I'm going to pretend it is until proven otherwise. So today, we are going to really do the first of the actual segments, diving into All We Can Save, which is our current Climate Book Club book. Oh, if you're new here, this is the Climate Book Club. So every Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we do a live stream where we talk about a current climate change related book, and we just kind of go chapter by chapter. And so we are starting with the first section, which is called Roots, or is it singular or plural? Root or roots? Root, it's singular. And so we are going to just look at the first four pieces within this. Now, if you are new to this book, it is a combination of essays and poems written by women in the climate movement. And even though they are more literary-based pieces, there are still a lot of concrete facts in this book too. So it kind of fills the urge for multiple different things in that way.
Very actionable thoughts too.
Yes, definitely very actionable thoughts. And it was published in 2020. So it is a very relevant book because, as we know, for those familiar with the climate movement, even in 5 years, things changed so much in the way of what has been done in the world and what we know. So it's, well, kind of, we knew it for a long time, but anyways, it's, so this is a very current book, and we're going to start the first four sections, or first four pieces in the first section, Roots. So the first piece is called Calling In, and it's by, shoot, I should have looked up how to pronounce her name. Zai Bestida. If I pronounced it right, it's Xiye. Mm-hmm. And so this first piece talks about her personal experiences. She is Indigenous person. And there's discrepancy on what people prefer to be called. I'm just going to use the term Indigenous because it seems like that's mostly been the term used in this book. So I'm trying to stay consistent. But yeah, so she is Indigenous person living in, let's see.
Well, she later moved to New York City.
She moved to New York City. She is originally from Mexico. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm going to take the cover off the book because it's going to make noise. But yeah, so basically, my mom and I are going to go through the parts of each of the four pieces that we found the most interesting and kind of just discuss it, because it is a book club. And if you all have read it, or if you haven't, but you have some interesting input into a point that we're talking about, please go ahead and use the live chat. That's what it's there for, to let me know your thoughts, because I want to hear them. So, all right. So the first part is called Calling In. And she talks about basically how the climate movement didn't really just start with even like Rachel Carson in the 1960s or Earth Day in the 1970s. It's been around for a long time, particularly in Indigenous knowledge, that it was something that was occurring, and therefore something that was going to continue to be an issue brought up. One of the first parts that I found interesting that she said was, human civilization needs to make drastic changes in its value system. It needs to mature. And I just like how they put that. Hi, Scott. Scott says, in my holds list from the library seems a bit popular right now.
Oh, good.
Well, I'm glad it's popular. And hi, Scott. Nice to see you here. Well, these pieces, some of them are long, some of them are short. So, just go along as much as you can when you are able to get the book. But I appreciate you joining us and following along when you can. Yeah, so she basically says what most of us are already thinking, which is that the human civilization needs to mature. But I like how she put it, needs to mature.
Yeah.
Like we have constantly been through, waves back. We have constantly been through changes in human history. And I feel like sometimes we like to forget that. Mm-hmm. Like we like to pretend like things have always been consistent,
yes.
And so whenever changes do happen, we're always just like having to be dragged, pulling and screaming. At least 90% of the population does, because we act like things have never changed before. And that's obviously not true, because if that was the case, women still would not be able to vote, and we still wouldn't, be basically where we're at. We have improved as much as we'd like to think that we haven't at all. We have improved a little bit. But we need to continue to improve. And there's a lot of room for improvement.
Well, and she points a lot to youth, and youth being a very strong voice right now. And I liked how she said youth have come to understand that they're the communicators of science, facts, policies, and solutions, and hope through language that reaches the general public. And I think that that's true.
I just kind of wish that our political sphere would parallel that, but it doesn't.
Yeah, no.
Because I think that's one of the reasons why we move so slowly, is because that is not necessarily translated into politics. But it's getting there with people like AOC and other influential freshmen in Congress. They're definitely like inputting. And then there's Bernie, who's really young at heart. She stresses that human civilization needs to mature, and that this shift cannot be a hobby. It needs to be a actual shift in culture and mindset. And I think right now it's still perceived as a hobby for multiple people. Like the Becca-sphere kind of is a hobby for me because I have a job outside of this. But I'm trying to integrate this way of thinking into other aspects of my life, from my workspace, trying to make it more climate change focused, to my personal life, decreasing my own individual impact as well as community impact. So it really does need to become a shift in culture and mindset. It can't just be like, oh, I have plants on the side. You know what I mean? Like it's bigger than that. It's not just like, I like sports. It's you are the athlete. Everybody is. So that's what I found interesting on page 4.
Well, she also says we have to adapt to a post-fossil fuel era. And I liked that too.
Yeah.
It takes you to a different place.
Yeah.
To say that you're a post-fossil fuel era.
So I was having a discussion. Scott says the most ancient wish of humanity is that we would get better at what we do. May may it always be so, looking forward in hope, not back in despair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's right.
Looking back in lessons, but not despair. That I like the way you put that. And I apologize for my dog drinking in the background. No, you can't see her. She's a black lab.
Well, and as part of that is we need to be at the bottom of page 4. She talks about the principle of collaboration rather than competition.
Yes. So that's a huge part, and it will continue to be paralleled throughout other facets of these pieces, is just how much humanity as a whole has emphasized competition in the way that it not only works in itself. I mean, capitalism literally is competition, but also how it perceives how the rest of the world works.
Mm-hmm.
We assume that one of the most important aspects of how plants and animals habitate spaces is that they're just competing with each other. And we're finding that that's not necessarily the case, that competition doesn't necessarily explain all the behavior of the world. But we'll get more into that later. One thing that I do want to mention is I was having a conversation in the comment section of my last video with someone, and the comment that I hear time and time again that came up is that we are not going to be able to be independent from fossil fuels for any time soon. And that's something that I just hear, like, we need to use natural gas to transition. We need to use like oil for certain aspects, and so we won't be actually post fossil fuel anytime soon. And I just get so depressed when I hear that, because I'm like, why? Like, I know that it's going to be hard to transition, but we have to, for actually the sake of our species and the world. So we can't just be kind of blasé about it. But it's an interesting thing, because, like, you want to be realistic and be like, yes, it's going to take time.
Yeah.
But also, I don't want people to become complacent right? By just saying it's going to take forever. So it's an interesting dilemma. I didn't know how to respond at that point, because I was like, you're right, but also I hope you're not right for very long, So it's a weird problem. But anyways, that thought came to mind. Another thing that she said is we need to be uncomfortable about the system to change it. And boy, are we uncomfortable right now. So check. And I think it's good that we're uncomfortable. Humans do not like to be uncomfortable, but it is definitely necessary in order for things to move. Yeah.
I like that phrase.
Yeah. Mom is highlighting that phrase. And overall, this was a pretty short first piece. One of the most important parts of the piece is towards the end of it, she makes a list for, if you want to join us, here's 10 tips on how to be a climate justice activist. And I am just going to read those out.
Okay.
Number 1, don't start from scratch. There are hundreds of existing initiatives that you can join. And that is something that I've already messed up on, because, I'm at the Beckosphere. But at the same time, I haven't, because I've formed connections with other community people in YouTube that have been working on the climate communication for a long period of time. So, interesting.
Well, and you also are going to be doing more volunteer work with the aquarium, too.
Oh, yeah.
Which has a lot of,
True. Yeah.
Sustainability goals.
Yeah, but it's a good point that, we often think like it was in the 70s where things weren't there. But now there's so many ways to get involved that you really don't need to start from fresh. Randy says, for the longest time, the fossil fuel industry has said no. Now they're saying not yet. That's BS. It's meant to keep them in control. I completely agree. There's people that disagree on whether or not they're being actually just plain evil, but Scott says, I love this house. If I have to move, I'm going to make my next house. There's so much I can't leave behind. Oh, this is so hard. Sir, I'm going to carry you out of your burning house now. I love that. No, I love this house. I'm not going to move it. Sir, the house is burning down. You need to move. Accurate. Good description. Thank you, Scott. Okay, number 2. Maintain good communication with your peers and the adult organizations you partner with. Yes. Just yes.
Yes.
3, take good care of yourself and others. I love that this was one because I think that's becoming more of a theme within multiple movements that are happening right now. I was hearing that from a racial justice person, that one thing that they prioritize is their own personal mental care and the care of those around them, because you cannot instill change if you are chaotic in your own life. So, and I'm on day 4 of my meditation.
Oh, good.
I've been using Headspace's documentary sort of thing on Netflix. Highly recommend. He's a cool dude. Nice British accent, you know.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I've been working on that myself. And that was inspired by the previous book that we read. So, 4, make your activism intersectional. Include all stakeholders in your decision-making and don't tokenize. Yes. Especially you white people, don't do it. 5, don't do things the patriarchal way, the racist way, the exhausting way, or the way that excludes marginalized voices just to be efficient and do things fast. Kind of goes similar to the 4th one, but I like the last part especially, where, you know, you don't want to just step over people to be fast. But at the same time, move.
Yeah.
It has to be both. 6, at events you hold, invite Indigenous people to do land acknowledgements and remember that Indigenous knowledge is the foundation of addressing the climate crisis. I'm proud to say the University of Oregon has actually done a really good job at that part whenever they had a presentation and stuff. I'm from UO, by the way. Go Ducks. They always started their speeches with, I would like to recognize that we are currently on Kalapuya land, and therefore, you know, just recognizing that the Indigenous people are there. I think one of the videos that I would like to do is I want to research who the Indigenous people were of Carmel.
Yeah.
Because I don't know anything. Like, I really didn't know much about Indigenous people at all until I went to University of Oregon, and that's not even my homeland. Well, besides the fact that I'm a little bit Native American.
And yeah, and the Ohlone people were very big in the Bay Area.
Yeah, true.
You don't remember that from school field trips.
I do a little bit, a teeny bit, but it was in elementary school.
And what tribe are you?
Me, I'm Blue Jacket. Yeah. Which I don't quite remember what the bigger nation is, though.
Cherokee or Sioux. I can't remember. Move on.
Oh, I'm looking bad. If my cousin Coral was watching this, she'd be so disappointed in me right now. Okay. So let's see. 7, always convey that individual and structural changes are both indisputably necessary. I love this one too, because people try to just argue for one or the other, and it needs to be both. I would like to add community in there too, which I guess could also be structural, but it's really the combination of both. I think that's where those two intersect, is community.
We learned that from the last book.
Exactly.
Andreas Corrales, did a lot of advocating for change at the community level.
Yes.
Makes a lot of sense.
And I love that. And I feel like a lot of people forget about it, including me. So I say it as many times as I can. 8, meet people where they're at. Not everyone knows the climate crisis back and forth. Explain it and present solutions. Yes. But also, you don't need to know everything to do something. 9, use accessible language. Not everyone knows the ppm, parts per million, or the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And yeah, it can't just be for the scientists. It has to be for everyone. And 10, talk about greenwashing, environmental racism, green gentrification, or as I call it, greenification.
I think you did that right.
Greenification, and what a just transition means. Yeah. So In case you didn't know, greenwashing is basically when companies and products pretend like they are environmentally friendly and usually end up spending more money on advertising that they're environmentally friendly than their actual environmental movements. Very common in many different things. Just look at dog poo packages. It's very disappointing.
It is disappointing.
Just because they're green does not mean they're really biodegradable. And yeah, I do want to do videos on these things. I will say for me personally, I have been hesitant to do videos on environmental racism because I feel nervous to do so as a white person because I don't want to talk over people. So I think I might need to interview someone.
Great idea.
Interviewing solves everything because then I don't have to be the expert anymore. And the last thing is climate change doesn't discriminate, but the ability to respond to climate disasters does. And I think that's a very important distinction that she made because I think a lot of people who like to push back on environmental racism and environmental justice being a needed forefront of climate change argue that, oh, climate change doesn't discriminate. Yes, but the structures that are supposed to respond to climate disasters is definitely stemmed in racism. Mm-hmm. So that's where it comes into play. All right. The next is called Reciprocity by Janine Benes. So she talks about how she did a forestry degree. And this piece, especially, Mom and I both found beautifully written. Gorgeous. So highly recommend, especially reading this one.
The word images are just awesome.
Do you want to read one of them?
The words are just so good. Well, we'll come across them.
Okay.
It's just really pretty.
So she explains how when she was getting her forestry degree, they were currently in the process of doing like release cut, which is basically where you thin out forest by choosing particular trees to cut down. And while a bunch of other students were excited about this because they thought it was fun, she hated it because she thought of the individual trees and how like it didn't seem right that they need to individually be cut down when before humankind that wasn't necessary. And my initial thought was, okay, but that's where forest fires come in. But it's because we have stopped the natural processes that used to thin out those spaces naturally. But anyways, so she had mentioned this to her professor and he compared her to Edward Clements, which is an ecologist in the early 1900s who won and then lost to the greatest debate of ecological history. So it's between Frederick Edward Clements and Henry Gleason. And basically it compared, Clements really focused on how there was an interconnection between everything and how it really like one thing heavily impacted another. And Henry Gleason, and I'm just completely paraphrasing, so if I get some of this kind of weird, let me know. And Henry Gleason really focused more on the individual organisms and competition amongst those organisms. So in the beginning, Clements' idea really took off, and he had the cooperative community theory, which basically was that things are cooperating together to make the overall community work. And so that took off until, I don't know, when was it? It was something. It took off until I think it was like the 70s or something.
Yeah.
And then for different reasons, his ideas became pretty much forgotten. And Gleason's work really took over. And I believe she said that it was basically because we were really focusing on the scientific aspect of things and trying to explain things in a scientific standpoint, not necessarily a sociological standpoint. And so competition made more sense for that regard. But she said, but here's what I love about the scientific method. Though culture seeps into science and sometimes holds its finger on the scale, it cannot stop the restless search for measurable truth. And I think that's something that a lot of people that go into conspiracy theories, they forget, is that scientists, the goal of science, the pure cause of science is to search for the truth. And so when there's all these scientific theories that have been substantiated for a long period of time, it's not because it's in scientists' best interest to portray those truths. It's because that is the conclusion that they came to through the scientific theory.
Yeah.
So she then talked about how that is slowly becoming back into trend, is that people are realizing that, oh, actually things are interconnected, and community-based community interaction matters more than they had originally thought. It doesn't just have to do with competition.
So here's a little point. It illustrates what he was talking about, as well as some of the writing. His thesis showed that the nutrient totals under oak trees were actually 5 to 60 times greater than in open grasslands. Those spreading trees, which people before were saying cut down, so artfully arranged in the California landscape, are nutrient pumps that lift minerals from the deep and scatter them in an annual leaf drop. Penetrating taproots loosen the dense soil, increasing water storage beneath the boughs, and welcoming a profusion of plants. Today, experts recommend protecting, not cutting, these islands of fertility.
Yeah.
So, interdependence.
Interdependence. And she then continues to talk about that from a human to human standpoint, as well as a humanity and the rest of the world standpoint. And so on page 11, she says, the more stressful the environment, the more likely you are to see plants working together to ensure mutual survival.
Yay.
And that then coincides with why am I struggling? Where is it? I was going somewhere. That then coincides with how diversity also matters for humankind as well.
Mm-hmm.
That was this section, right? Or was that a different one? Am I combining things? I think I'm combining
That
things.
might be the next story.
That was the next story. I'm combining things. But that I believe she thinks it's true. No. Okay, so basically she's stressing that the cooperative behavior is really what's important. And she uses another example with fungi. And I love fungi because they're really cool. I have a tattoo of fungi, which, by the way, if you give me a 300, I will do a tattoo tour. But she says 80% of all land plants have roots that grow in association with the mycorrhizae fungi. It's rare to find thriving mycorrhizal networks in agricultural fields. So that really shows the dichotomy between how the natural world works versus how humans have kind of made their section of the world work. And what she really meant by bringing up this part is that those fungi not only interact with certain plants, but they interact with multiple plants. And it's kind of she called it a wood wide web.
I love that phrase. A wood wide web.
A wood wide web. It's kind of a tongue twister. But basically, it really shows that it's such a complicated ecosystem, and it's been developing for such a long time that it needs to be respected, and it really should be focused on. Scott says it's almost like hundreds of millions of years of evolution gave rise to complex interdependent biowebs over and over again in different climate zones. Crazy, you don't say. Yeah. Basically. And she said we wouldn't want to interrupt a vital conversation. Yeah. So if humans are to reverse global warming, we need to step into a flow of the carbon cycle in new ways, stopping our excessive exhale of carbon dioxide and encouraging a winding ecosystem of the planet to take a good long inhale as they heal. It will mean learning to help the helpers, those microbes, plants, and animals that do the daily alchemy of turning carbon into life. Yeah, I liked that. Scott, shocking. I'm shocked. You're funny, Scott. And the last paragraph, which I'll read because I really liked it, of this part is, One of the fallouts of our 50-year focus on competition is that we came to view all organisms as consumers and competitors first, including ourselves. Now we're decades into a different understanding by recognizing at last the ubiquity of sharing and chaperoning, by acknowledging the fact that communal traits are quite natural. We get to see ourselves anew. We can turn to our role as nurturers, each a helper among helpers in this planetary story of collaborative healing. That was beautiful.
It's beautifully written.
It's beautifully written.
So nice.
And then they cut through some of the heavy section with a nice little poem. And this is called The Big Picture by Ellen Bass. Should I just read it? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. I'm going to read it because it's less needed of my commentary and more
It's just a
nice poem. So
beautiful.
I'm going to read it. I tried to look at the big picture. The sun, ardent tongue, licking us like a mother besotted. I'm dyslexic, by the way. Okay, I'm going to start over. I try to look at the big picture. The sun, ardent tongue, licking us like a mother besotted with her new cub, will wear itself out. Everything is transitionary. Think of the meteor that annihilated the dinosaurs, and before that, the volcanoes of the Permian period. All those burnt ferns and reptiles and sharks and bony fish. That was extinction at a scale that makes our losses look like a bad day at the slots. And perhaps we're slated to ascend to some kind of intelligence that doesn't need bodies or clean water or even air. But I can't shake my longing for the last 600 Liberian lynx with their tufted ears, Brazilian guitarfish, the 4% of them still cruising the seafloor, eyes staring straight up, and all the newborn marsupials, red kangaroos, joeys the size of honeybees, steelhead trout, river dolphins, so many species of frogs breathing it through their damp, permeable membranes. Today on the bus, a woman in a sweater, the exact shade of cardinals, and her cardinal-colored bra strap exposed on her pale shoulder makes me ache for those bright flashes in the snow and polar bears, the cream and amber of their fur, the long, hollow hairs through which sun sips swallowed into their dark skin. When I get home, my son has a headache, and though he's almost grown, he asks me to sing a song. We lie together on the lumpy couch, and I warble out the old show tunes night and day. They can't take that away from me. A cheap silver chain simmers across his throat, rising and falling with his pulse. There never was anything else. Only these excruciatingly insignificant creatures we love. Beautiful. I love the last part where she talks about the excruciatingly insignificant creatures, because that really is the dichotomy of life. Is we need to feel like we bring something to the table, that we have purpose, but at the same time, we need to recognize that we are just one little thing in this big world, and to tread as such. And now we are on to the last section we're going to talk about today, which is called Indigenous Prophecy and Mother Earth by Sherry Michelle Wena Hamu Kwasat, Penawissabaket Nation. So it's one person, but that was her title. And there is my cat. Yep. Hi, Rue. So in this part, she's another Indigenous person, as the root section really focuses on Indigenous rights, because that really is the root of America, is Indigenous. And this is kind of an America-focused book in a way, because these are all American authors. But yeah, so she starts by talking about how Indigenous people are not like European people, and that's okay. If not, it's good. And we're finding out that they have a lot to offer that was previously either looked down upon or just erased or ignored. And she says, because Indigenous people didn't share European ideas about land ownership, we were considered primitive. Because we had no desire to place the sources of our survival, natural resources, into a stream of commerce, we were viewed as ignorant. And because our value systems were based on relationships and not currency, we were believed to lack the capacity to live civilized lives. Ironically, the Indigenous ways of knowing and being that European colonists saw as primitive and uncivilized are now being actively sought out to save our environment and humankind from the brink of extinction. Yep. She also says, in recent years, many scientists have realized that they are now discovering what Indigenous people have known all along. I'm basically just reading you guys like the parts that I found interesting. And Mom, interject with parts you found interesting too. She says on page 18, the challenge for science has always been to see beyond the confines of its inherent bias and to overcome hierarchical, reductionist, and compartmentalized thinking to see the holistic patterns that are present throughout creation. And so that's another very interesting definition of science. We had a definition of science just 2 pieces ago, and they are definitely similar, where they are just the search for truth and to try to avoid the human element that comes along with biases when looking for the truth. Yeah. And she focuses really on kinship of systems. So instead of focusing on anthrocentric ideas, which we have been for all of humanity, we now need to focus on kincentric ideas, which is what she calls it here. And basically, kin are just everything. Yeah. It's just other beings that live around us. It's recognizing that we are just one species amongst many, and that they have a part to play in the world, and they also have knowledge that we need to listen to.
She gives several creator type of stories.
Yeah.
And in the creator stories, the one thing she says is there were always other animals created before people.
Mm-hmm.
And the animals were sort of seen as grandfather, grandmother, as those who came before. And you can even say that in the Christian one as well. The animals were created first before the people were.
Yeah. So and humans were meant to be caretakers.
Humans were meant to be caretakers. And then on page 19, she says, each element within creation, including humans, has the right and the responsibility to respectfully coexist as co-equals within the larger system of life. So as caretakers.
Yeah.
So it's very much living in harmony is a lot of what she wants us to learn from the Indigenous people.
Yeah. And I also like how she brought up how in September 2015, scientists from 11 institutions published the first draft of their Open Tree of Life project in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, funded by the National Science Foundation, which showed the living connection amongst 2.3 million species. So if there was any doubt that there was interconnectivity amongst species in our world, boom. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I really liked that because it just, I like how she lays it out in a way that many people, it hits you from the emotional standpoint, but also the scientific, analytical standpoint. So I thought that was really cool. And she said that Indigenous knowledge recognizes that the familiar relationship and acknowledges that all life is both sovereign and interdependent, and that each element within creation, including humans, has the right and responsibility to respectfully coexist as co-equals within a larger system of life. So in her Indigenous upbringing, she was taught that it is both individual and community.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just individual, which is kind of how we are brought up. So I liked that a lot too. Yeah. And through Indigenous people comprise about 5% of the global population, though Indigenous people comprise only about 5% of the global population, our lands hold approximately 80% of the world's biodiversity and an estimated 40 to 50% of the remaining protected places in the world. We also create the least greenhouse gases and have the largest carbon stores on the planet within our territories. Just loved that. I think the Amazon is a big example of that. It
must be. I would love to see. I think there's a little asterisk there. It would be nice to see what the breakdown of Indigenous people are.
Yeah, but basically whatever land they were given, or like whatever land was subscribed to them after colonization, it really shows that even though they had just as much land property as, they were given a certain amount and they chose to preserve it instead of developing on it.
Yeah.
Which is the difference of thought.
That's so different from our culture.
So different from our culture. And she specifies that human beings have fallen out of alignment with life, which is true. And that requires non-Indigenous people to stand with Indigenous to ensure that our lands, water, and ways of life are not further eroded by government and industrial intrusion.
What page are you on?
I'm on page 20.
Okay.
Now I'm on page 21.
Okay. Moving on.
We cannot separate ourselves from those who have come before us or those who will follow, because we will all exist together in this moment. And so that she's talking about basically we can't separate ourselves from the past or the future. And I think some certain executives in certain polluting industries like to disconnect themselves from the future.
Yeah.
And that leads us to these problems that we see because we don't look at the long term. We're very short-sighted.
Yeah, in the quote that she has here, the little indentation, in our bodies, we carry the blood of our ancestors and the seeds of the future generations. We are the living conduit to all life.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's another very good writer.
Yeah.
Really amazing.
Absolutely.
And then there's a story of a sky woman.
Yes. So the Sky Woman, I had heard that in my environmental classes. I think that's probably one of the most well-known Indigenous creation stories. And
but you liked a different one.
I liked a different one. My favorite one was
what page?
On page 21 still.
Oh.
It's on the bottom.
Oh.
The first human is formed from the soil of Mother Earth. In that story, the eyes are the first part of the body to be created. Once the eyes are created, the first human must remain in the soil for an entire cycle of life, watching how the rest of creation moves before their arms and legs are given to them. I love that. I wish that was what happened.
You have to just watch.
Yeah, literally just sit there, observe, appreciate, and then move. Mm-hmm. And I think, we're seeing similar teachings in like meditation, mindfulness, just appreciating what is around you before you impact it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Charity.
Stop it. No.
The dog is named Charity. There's two, but she's the one that's making all the noise. Yeah, hi. And let's see. Oh, there's so much to say.
Well, I would be on page bottom page 23 next. but
23, page
You
23.
would have to. Is that where you want to be?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Diversity fosters social coherence, creating more stable and harmonious relational networks, which in turn lead to more stable and harmonious societies. Additionally, the more diverse a group or community, the greater the perspectives and innovations that arise, and the greater the success rate for all.
Mm-hmm.
I just love that. Human diversity is just as critical to society as biodiversity is to an ecosystem. Without it, there can be no healthy functioning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am snickering at your comment, Scott.
What do you think?
He said, it's all fluffy pluff mysticism. I'm getting in my giant American truck.
Is it a Ford F-150 or a 2?
And then he says, sigh. Loving the stillness and power of the earth is so rare here.
Yeah.
And I hope it's becoming more common, though. I like to think it is.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. We're too busy to appreciate the world.
Well, and that's why this is a very good first section in this book. It just kind of brings us back to the basics, right?
Yeah.
And to our origin.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. Absolutely. I also like the part also on page 23 where she says the stifling of creative knowledge, creative thinking and suppression of critical analysis that results from such narrow representation erodes the overall intelligence of the entire society. And boy, are we seeing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that just, this is the piece where she talks about the importance of diversity in human civilization as well as in the world.
Way cool.
Yeah. 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 And then she talks about many examples of how different Indigenous leaders over time have really predicted what we are seeing now in like the 70s or earlier. Basically, white men come and fuck shit up. I say bad word, but true. That's basically what they're saying.
They mess things up.
Our ancestors spoke of a time 7 generations after first contact was made with the white man, when Mother Earth would become sick as a result of human activity.
That's sad.
Yeah. But it's crazy how many of them predicted it. She gives many examples of different people from different Indigenous communities all saying that same thing. And it's all 7. What is with the number 7?
I don't know.
It comes up in many religions. It's just very interesting. Yeah. But yeah. So I'm going to leave you guys to read those things because it is almost an hour at this point, and I want to give you guys teasers. And also 2 people have since dropped off, so I think it's probably time for me to go. And Scott says, you can't be sneaky here. Okay, so there's been chaos now in the house, so I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you found this as interesting as I did. If you haven't gotten a chance yet, please get your copy of All We Can Save. On next Thursday, we are going to talk about Carly. The other dog. Next Thursday, you tell us, dog. Yes. See, other species have things to say. Like there's person. But yeah, so next Thursday, we are going to do the second half of the root chapter because there's 4 more pieces. It's perfect. And so we will be doing that on Thursday. On Tuesday, I'm going to cover how the U.S. Looks compared to the rest of the world in the way of renewable energy, to give us more of an international perspective on how the U.S. could do better. And yeah, so remember to talk about the climate every single day and to support your local news organizations. And I will see you all on Tuesday. Bye. And it's going to close and we're done. Cool.